Welcome, Pewter Report readers, viewers, and listeners to a Wednesday edition of the Pewter Report Podcast, energized by Celsius, the official energy drink of Pewter Report. Today's going to be a fun show. It's not just for Buccaneer fans. Dolphins and Jaguars fans are welcome too. That's right. Today, we want to know who runs this state of Florida, of course, we're talking about. Are the Bucs the best team in Florida? Well, we're going to find out today. We're going to go through each team, what they've done this offseason, and what the outlook for 2024 might be. With a very special guest. Yes, she is a Bucs beat writer, but she's also a Jags beat writer and a Dolphins beat writer. She works for golflive.com. I am talking about Maura Carey, and she joined us for the Pewter Report draft show on day 3. So you might remember her if you watched that video. But Maura, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back.
Yes.
Very excited to get to the bottom of this.
I know. Yeah. I mean, because the thing is, as popular as the Buccaneers are and became when they won the Super Bowl and had Tom Brady and these 3 NFC South championships in a row, 4 straight playoff appearances, you know, they're not Florida's team. I don't know that Florida has a team because the Dolphins got here first in the state. And they kind of occupy the south part of Florida, southern Florida. I think the Buccaneers have got a stranglehold on central Florida, although there are some Dolphins fans in the Orlando area. I know that for a fact. And then the north, you've got Jacksonville, the Jaguars, the newest Florida team, although they've been here for well over 20 years. So it's going to be interesting to see how these teams fare. The only measuring stick we have between all 3 teams this year is just preseason games that don't count. But it is interesting to note that they will play the Jaguars and have a joint practice with them for the second preseason game up in Jacksonville. And then for the third and final preseason game, they will welcome the Dolphins to Tampa Bay for a joint practice and a preseason game to end the exhibition season. So we'll get a chance to see these teams head to head a little bit in practice, Maura.
Definitely. No, I'm excited. I'm very excited that proposal got approved. I knew they were trying to work towards that, but definitely makes my job a whole lot easier having 2 and 1.
For sure. So, you know, let's kind of dive into this and set the stage a little bit for the teams. When you look at the 3 Florida teams, the Buccaneers, in some regards, had the more successful season because it's really about how far can you go, right, in the postseason and all of that. So let's take a look at kind of the overview of what transpired last year, and maybe make some educated guesses as to how it's going to shake out this year. So who runs Florida? Well, the 2023 record for these teams, you can see the Buccaneers and the Jaguars both finished 9-8. The Buccaneers did have the head-to-head win on Christmas Eve against what was a slumping Jaguars team at the time and a surging Bucs team. Of course, the Dolphins, they won 11 games, but they didn't win their division, and the Bucs did. So when you look at these 3 teams and just the end of last year, Maura, you've got the Buccaneers overcoming a 4-7 start with a 5-1 finish, and they actually won a home playoff game and advanced to the second round. The Dolphins, well, they started off hot, cooled off a little bit towards the end of the season, and they made the playoffs as a wild card team, and then ran into the Kansas City buzzsaw on a very frozen Arrowhead Stadium in the first round of the playoffs. Jaguars missed the playoffs altogether by 1 game, started off 8-3 like the Dolphins did, but really had a miserable finish at 1-5.
Yes, I think this is a super interesting graphic to look at. Records alone, I guess you could say the Dolphins performed the best. But if you think about heading into this season, who were the teams with the highest expectations? Well, the Bucs coming off a run with Brady, highly underestimated Baker Mayfield. Really, a lot of teams or a lot of analysts thought the Bucs might tank, look for their next quarterback in the future. The expectations were extremely low for the Buccaneers. Now, these other 2 teams, the expectations were significantly higher for.
Right.
The Dolphins, it was kind of a make-it-break-it year for Tua. And then the Jags were coming off an exciting playoff run, kind of was hoping to see more progression in Trevor Lawrence's game. So you look at that 9-8 record for the Jags, you look at that 9-8 record for the Bucs, and even though they are the same, I think they mean two totally different things.
Yeah.
I think the Jags didn't quite meet expectations, especially with that really tough end just left an absolute sour taste in their mouth for the offseason. The Bucs exceeded expectations. And then you have the Dolphins kind of in this middle ground, where I would argue maybe they didn't meet expectations either.
Yeah.
I mean, they had this fantastic start to the season, looked like a real Super Bowl contender, and then fizzled out once again. The Bills were just, once again, their kryptonite for another season. So very interesting to kind of compare just from a record standpoint.
Yeah, and it's funny, Bat W makes a good point here. Southern teams don't ever play well when it's really cold, and I don't know if anybody's going to play well in that game in Kansas City. There were people that literally suffered from frostbite and were having I think heart attacks in the stadium. I mean, I've been to Arrowhead Stadium, not when it's that cold, but growing up in Kansas City, I mean, Midwest winters can be brutal. And there is some talk that that Missouri might lose the Chiefs to Kansas, and the state of Kansas has put a proposal out there to build a domed stadium just because of instances like that. Like when you're talking postseason games in Kansas City, it gets really cold, and the Dolphins found that out in a very, very bad way.
Absolutely. And of course, you have Tyreek Hill, who feels that he has something to prove.
Right.
You could argue he had more team success, not individual success necessarily, but with the Chiefs. So he comes out, feels like negative degrees, and he's shirtless warming up. So that was Tyreek Hill's strategy.
Yeah.
Now he didn't really show up in that game like they needed him to. I would say that loss to the Bills the week prior was just kind of the nail in the coffin. It changed really the whole playoff picture for the Dolphins, who had that, good standing number 3, number 2 seed all throughout the regular season.
Yeah. And I think too, when you list, we'll dive deeper into kind of the numbers of where these teams ranked last year. And there has been some changes, and we'll get to those in just a second, but it's interesting to note that on paper, if you look at these teams in terms of the scoring offenses, I'm not a huge believer in total offense and total defense. It's really about points. Todd Bowles would say the same thing. He doesn't care about yards. It's points. That's what wins games, not how many yards you pick up. But there's no denying, though, that the Dolphins, when you look at that scoring offense of 27.9 points per game, Jacksonville, which ranked third, by the way, Jacksonville's offense, kind of middle of the pack, obviously, and Tampa Bay is not really too far behind in terms of scoring points. Then you look at the scoring defenses, and it's kind of crazy because the difference between the 5th scoring defense, which was the Buccaneers, 19.2 points per game, and then all of a sudden Jacksonville's middle of the pack at 21.8. So you're talking about just a couple of points difference. And then Miami's all the way down there at 22nd, but only 23.2 points per game. There's not a lot separating those particular defenses. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to note that the Jaguars, they've kept their staff intact, I believe, but the Dolphins do have a new defensive coordinator, and Anthony Weaver came over from Baltimore. But it wasn't like the Dolphins defense was that bad. You look at the rankings, 11th.
The Jags. Sorry to interrupt. The Jags actually, they pretty much wiped their whole staff out as well.
True.
So they'll be heading in with a new defensive coordinator as well. So both teams, major changes coming.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, though, when you look at the scoring defense for the Dolphins, 22 points or 23 points per game, that's more than obviously they wanted to give up. But the other rankings, not too bad. And then you consider the injuries that they had. They lost both of their edge rushers in Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb last year. So to get those, those numbers, I understand they wanted to get rid of Vic Fangio, but it wasn't like it was like that, bad of a defense last year. It's still got this team a double-digit winning season into the playoffs.
I do think that the Dolphins defense really kind of started to find their identity throughout last season. I thought some of these big playmakers that they had really did a nice job. They were starting to gel. Then towards the middle of the season, it really, really started to fall apart. And that's where I think the week 5 bye, or the week 6 bye, this year for them is going to be a big hurdle. because this is this trend that we've seen with the Dolphins where they really start to slow down. They start to lose players. The momentum just kind of fizzles out. And then a lot of these players that they had that were kind of their big time defensive playmakers aren't there anymore. Like there was, meme after meme on X about Jalen Ramsey just kind of looking around defense.
Right.
Like, who's here? Because they lost, Xavier Howard, Christian Wilkins, Jerome Baker, then a really great, just versatile player in Andrew Van Ginkel. They lost a ton defensively.
They really did.
I would expect that, it's going to take some time for them to really start to gel.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll get to the defense in a second. Let's kind of go position by position. And I think maybe the best way to do it, I should say unit by unit, is we'll kind of give our opinions about which team has the best, and we'll rank them from 1 to 3 out of these categories here. Maybe that's the best way to take a look at these teams and kind of see how they measure up against each other. So this is a real challenging one, right? When you look at the Buccaneers, right? They've got 2 of the absolute best receivers in the NFL, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Both of those receivers have had 1,000 yards in each of the last 3 seasons. Evans has done it for the last 10, right? But Chris Godwin going back to the slot now, he's a little bit more dangerous. The quarterbacks, Tua Tagovailoa, he's a very good quarterback, and obviously when you've got the weaponry that he has at his disposal, he finally is living up to those first-round draft expectations, on the verge of getting a new contract. Same with Trevor Lawrence. Baker Mayfield just got paid. I think these 3 quarterbacks are pretty darn good. I don't think there's any of these teams that are unhappy with their quarterbacks, right?
No, I don't think so either. And that's just the huge discussion this offseason was, when is Tua going to get paid? He kind of went from that guy that was, is he going to get paid, to now, when is it going to happen? The Dolphins are very confident in their guy there. Same deal with the Jags. Now contract negotiations have officially begun between the Jags and Trevor Lawrence. So they're looking to lock up their long-term guys there. I think all 3 teams here, as you can see with the contracts, the production on the field, all 3 teams did really well in the quarterback department this past year and for the years to come.
It's interesting to note, too, with these running backs, they're all versatile running backs. They can run, they can catch. And Rachaad White fell just short of 1,000 yards at 990 yards
that
rushing.
Hurts.
Yeah, but Raheem Mostert had 1,012 yards. He barely made it. Right? He barely topped 1,000 yards. And then you look at the same thing with Travis Etienne for the Jaguars, 1,008 yards. So you've got Rashad 10 yards short of it, Etienne 8 yards over it, and Mostert 12 yards over it. So these running backs, I think, are all kind of interchangeable in terms of the production, at least, right? Maybe Rachaad White more receiving yards and maybe a little bit more of an all-around threat. But when you look at the running game for the Dolphins, it was pretty substantial between Mostert, and I think this is really where the Dolphins might have the edge in the running back department is Devin Achane, right? That's more of a 1-2 punch than either Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby or Rachaad White and the unproven Bucky Irving at this point, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that Rachaad White really emerged as a dual threat this year. That's really where he shined. I think similar situation with Travis Etienne, although what you kind of saw with Etienne this year was a lot of inconsistency, which is not what the Jags were looking for and not what they needed in some case. I think their running game sort of fell flat. The Dolphins really got what they needed from Mostert. I'd have to look up his exact amount of touchdowns, but he had no problems getting into the end zone this year for them, and really was just a constant he was a consistent force for them. So if I had to rank them 1, 2, and 3 based off of last season alone, I would go Mostert, White, and then Etienne. Only because of that red zone kind of conversion from Raheem Mostert. He had no problems. And then Devon Achane, he was on injured reserve for a little bit last year. He had an extremely hot start and then kind of was working back from that injury for the rest of the season. I think those 2 are going to have a phenomenal season. I feel very good about the Dolphins run game. Now the Bucs, really excited about the season Rashad had, and had the second most carries in the league, tied with Christian McCaffrey. So he took a heavy load last year. And I think
all 19 games too,
Yes. And so I think that, getting that complimentary back is so important. And we haven't seen much of anything from Bucky Irving so far, but if his college career and his ability to break tackles is any indication, then the Bucs may have gotten a good one.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Bucky Irving. Again, though, you got to prove it, right? I mean, he's yet to carry the rock in any NFL game yet, and we've only had a rookie minicamp and one OTA to really judge him. But then
interesting enough too, all three teams did draft a running back.
Yeah.
So they're looking for, I would argue it's maybe a slightly more important position, complimentary back for the Bucs. The other two teams, I think, are just kind of looking to add some depth there. Yeah. I also think it could be interesting if you see Achane potentially as a kick returner this year. I think we'll have to see what happens there. But yeah, I think running back becomes a little bit more of a versatile position this year for sure.
Yeah, agreed. And he's got speed to burn too. He's an absolute blazer when it comes to that. And it gets interesting because then the tight end position, Jonnu Smith is just kind of a been there, done that, receiving tight end. Same with Evan Ingram. Cade Otton shows a little bit of strides there. I think how this shakes out right here is probably Jonnu Smith, Evan Ingram have the edge over Cade Otton in the tight end department.
Right. Evan Ingram comes off of a very strong season for the Jags. 963 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a really good weapon for Trevor Lawrence. I would probably give him the number 1 spot here.
Yeah.
I also think Cade Otton showed a ton of promise.
He did. Towards the end of the season, that postseason, he was the leading receiver.
Right. So I think we're going to see great things to come with him for sure. So I would say it might be kind of between those two right now. I don't know a ton about Jonnu Smith. He's new to the roster. But I know the Dolphins are really hoping to up their tight end presence, really have that become a part of their game to mix up their offense even more. So I think we'll have to see what happens with him.
He's kind of a big-time receiving tight end, kind of an undersized guy in the Evan Ingram mold. And he really split time with Kyle Pitts and produced identical numbers in Atlanta. And that's just kind of how that offense was under Arthur Smith.
Right.
So now that he's kind of like instead of the co-headliner, he's the sole headliner there. When you got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Odell Beckham Jr. and all this, and you've got those guys that are, that are going to draw a lot of attention to, or I should say by opposing defenses, it's going to leave Jonnu Smith open a lot, I believe. And this is really where it gets interesting because now you're looking at the wide receiver position. And boy, the first two guys on top of the depth chart for the Buccaneers, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody on these other teams, right? Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans actually tied for touchdowns. Some would have Tyreek Hill ahead of Mike Evans, and I can't argue that. I don't want to be a homer per se, but they're two different types of wide receivers. Jalen Waddle is a very good complementary receiver to Tyreek Hill. He's a 1,000-yard caliber receiver as well.
Absolutely.
But really where it gets interesting is when you look at the third guy on this list, right? It's either Trey Palmer or Jalen McMillan for the Buccaneers. It's Odell Beckham Jr. now for the Dolphins. And it's first-round pick Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jaguars, who also have Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis, the import from Buffalo. Yeah,
I would say a year from now, if we revisit this chart, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the number 1 guy for the Jags. I mean, that is what they brought him in to be, kind of that Calvin Ridley replacement. And so it'll be interesting to see how he performs. I really think that, he could be the guy that they're hoping him to be. Led the Division I football in touchdowns last year.
17 at LSU.
Yes. And I mean, that's alongside Neighbors and a lot of other threats that they had there. So I think that Brian Thomas Jr. can definitely be the guy that the Jags need him to be. Is he going to compare to Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans? That's a little bit far-fetched.
Yeah.
But then I also think we break it down to the 1 and 2 receivers, right? So we have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin compared with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And the Jags really aren't in the conversation in this part. But that's a really interesting discussion because while I would give Tyreek the edge over Mike Evans, which I think is probably a universal thought, I would give Mike Evans and Chris Godwin the edge over Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle just because of their proven, consistent talent over the years.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with that. I think that's a great way to kind of parse that out. And the other thing too is when you look at Chris Godwin going back to the slot, I think his
Right.
touchdown production is going to shoot up a little bit.
Absolutely.
That's really been the biggest knock on him. He's had the 1,000 yards. He's dealt with a knee injury a couple of years ago, but it's going from 9 touchdowns, his season high in 2019, his lone Pro Bowl season, to 7 the next year, and then to 5, then to 3, then to 2.
Mhm.
And so the Buccaneers want to see that number get up. In the meantime, you've got a touchdown monster that you have to feed in Mike Evans, who's capable of getting 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 touchdowns just by himself because he's so good in working in the red zone. So
It's a good problem to have for the
it
Bucs.
is.
That's
Yeah,
for sure.
it is.
Um,
I think of Mike Evans as the shark and Chris Godwin as the remora, right? Who's trying to feed off the scraps of the shark. That's kind of how it operates in the ocean world there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited to see Chris Godwin back inside in a new offense. I'm just excited to see what happens there. I think his confidence will be back. I think we'll see a lot more creativity from him. I mean, you could see it all over his face yesterday, 2 days ago at OTAs when he was just he was just excited to get back to where he feels like he belongs. So I definitely think we'll see a lot more production from him this year.
He's also on a contract year that has a way of motivating people. Look at the likes of Antoine Winfield Jr. last year and Mike Evans as well. Both of those guys really balled out in a contract year and got paid. And so did Baker Mayfield too. So as we round out this category here of the skill position players, the other guy is kind of the wild card, right? It's for the Buccaneers is Jalen McMillan because he's going to be challenging Trey Palmer for wide receiver 3. All 4 of those guys are going to play because this is a 3 wide receiver offense. You're always going to have one of these guys kind of in rotation.
Right.
Like Evans at age 31 is not going to be able to play every down. Chris Godwin at age 28 is not going to play every down. So you're going to see a lot of either Palmer or McMillan rotating through there. And they'll split time too at the flanker position. But as you mentioned, the Dolphins drafted Jalen Wright, the running back out of Tennessee. And this guy is lightning in a bottle too, as if they didn't already have a 1-2 punch with Mostert and Achane. Now they've got another guy that's capable of maybe becoming a starting caliber running back. And Devin Duvernay, he's that kind of wide receiver 4 in Jacksonville, and we'll see how it shakes out there. But each of these teams has even more weapons than just the starters.
Yeah, I would say Devin Duvernay, what they're hoping for there is, he's an all-pro returner, and that's what they want from him. Very important this year. I'm interested to see what happens in Tampa with the returners, with special teams, because we saw McMillan lining up yesterday. Mm-hmm. We saw Palmer lining up. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how that shakes out. Again, I mentioned Achane earlier, potentially returning. So, I mean, the Dolphins have no problems when it comes to speed. That is for sure. And it'll just be interesting to see how the other 2 teams shake out with that as well. Because I think when you look at Devin Duvernay, yes, he might have an impact as a 4th receiver. But I think he's more of a kickoff guy. And then Braxton Berrios is hungry for the Dolphins too, because he wants to stay in Miami for another year after this. So he's definitely excited about the new kickoff rules as well.
All right, Maura. So we have to sit there and rank the skill positions, kind of encompassing all of these players here. Do you want to go first or shall I?
You go ahead let's go position by position. So let's start with quarterback.
Okay. I think with quarterback, I think Tua, just because that offense fits in like a glove.
I agree.
And he had such a monster year last year in terms of the production that he had. I mean, the 3rd ranked passing game, you're looking at 29 touchdowns, very similar to what Baker put up, 4,600 yards. I think that him guiding that offense and the fact that he is, going to be in yet another year with Mike McDaniel, there's a little bit of consistency and continuity there. So he's not my favorite quarterback, but I'm going to give Tua the slight edge in this argument just because of some of the newness. But I wouldn't be surprised if it all shakes out that I think Baker can end up being the number 1 guy on this list, because he's not too far off with over 4,000 yards himself, a career high, and also with 28 touchdowns, another career high. And he went to the Pro Bowl. So I'm going to go kind of 1A and 1B to it in Baker. And I think Trevor Lawrence has got a little bit to prove. I mean, he played injured last year. He was banged up. But that slide last year and the offensive struggles that they had. When you're a first round pick, or number 1 overall, you're the trigger man. A lot of the blame and a lot of the success right on your shoulders for the team. And I would put Trevor Lawrence, even though he might be, I think he is the most physically gifted of the three. I think he's probably number 3 on this list.
I would agree with that order exactly. I like the 1A, 1B there because, Tua, I think just because he led the NFL in passing yards last year, because that offense does suit him so well. And he's got a hell of an arm.
Yeah.
I would put him at first. However, turnovers started to emerge as a problem at the end of the year. He was in the MVP conversation to start off the season. So there was a lot of excitement around Tua. The Dolphins are confident in him. I do think you see him get that contract very, very shortly. But I would put him just ahead of Baker Mayfield. But like you said, I do think Mayfield has the potential to top that list eventually. I think he had a phenomenal season, took care of the ball, and I think that he could eventually get to the top of that list. I do agree that Lawrence still has stuff to prove. This is a personal favorite picture of mine right here. But I do agree that Lawrence still has stuff to prove. Turnovers, again, were a problem for him. Yeah. He, not only just throwing interceptions, but you saw him fumble quite a bit as well. So he's really kind of got to figure out how to take care of the ball for the first time really in his entire career. We're talking high school, college, now professional. He sat out with injuries this year. Yeah. He's never had to deal with that type of adversity in his career before. So I think that maybe his confidence faltered slightly there. And I think this year is going to be huge for him. So I think that's also why some Jags fans were kind of surprised, and the NFL in general seemed kind of surprised when talks of a contract emerged there. Also, Tua hasn't won a playoff game. If you look at it from a playoff perspective, Trevor has won a playoff game. Baker Mayfield has won a playoff game, multiple. And so now, the pressure's kind of on Tua as well. So interesting to see how this shakes up, but I will say Tua 1, Baker 2, Trevor 3, but it is close.
And running backs, we kind of touched on this. I would go the Dolphins running game first, and then I believe that the Bucs running game is actually going to do something this year. I really do
too.
And I believe
maybe we're naive, but maybe we're naive,
Maura. Yeah. I'm going to go Bucs 2, and I'm going to go Jaguars 3 because I think Bucky Irving is a little bit of a diamond in the rough, and when Rashad's not getting the rock, there's not going to be much drop off with Bucky Irving. That's just how I see it.
I do too, and I will say that Chase Edmonds looked really good yesterday too. Yeah. I was watching, and I thought he looked really great too. So maybe he'll play inspired this year as well. And again, that could be a good problem to have for the Bucs. But I do think that Bucky Irving can really be a strong complementary back for White. And maybe we are naive, but I'm feeling confident in the game as well. So I would say, just if we're going off those 1 and 2 guys for the Bucs versus those 1 and 2 guys for the Jags, I'll take the Bucs there as well. So same order here. No differences of opinion so far for us.
When we look at the tight end position, I think Evan Ingram, he and Jonnu Smith, they're the veterans when it comes to catching the ball and producing, right? And Cade Otton's not quite there yet, but there is some promise. But I'll believe it when I see it. I think Evan Ingram is kind of the clear one. Jonnu Smith, I think, is going to be a little bit of a surprise this year for Miami, a pleasant surprise. I'll go with him 2, and then Cade Otton 3.
I think from what we've seen so far, that's absolutely fair. Would like to see Cade Otton slip into that 2 spot for sure. But we'll have to see as the year shakes out. Right now, Evan Ingram is definitely that clear first spot. I'll take Jonnu at 2nd and Cade at 3rd.
Wide receivers as a whole, including the 3rd wide receiver and even, maybe the 4th. But I think the wide receiver position.
Now, if we say Bucs here, a lot of people are going to disagree, I think.
I know. I think Miami has a little bit more firepower, especially with Odell Beckham Jr. I think Miami, and then Tampa Bay, and then Jacksonville in that order.
I agree. I think that, like I said earlier, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin against Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. I do like the 2 veterans there. I really do. Yeah. But as a whole, now that we've added in Odell Beckham Jr.,
right,
who's a much more experienced guy than Trey Palmer, has shown us way more throughout his career. I'd go with that same order for sure. Dolphins first, Bucs second.
Exactly.
But the Bucs don't have much to complain about when it comes to a wide receiver either.
No, and they got better with Jalen McMillan, and we'll see how Trey Palmer emerges. And Bucs fans, Dolphins fans, and Jaguars fans, you can follow Maura Carey on X at Takes by Maura. So make sure you do that. And I don't have any great segue, so I'm just gonna put the graphic up for Celsius because I'm a little thirsty now after talking about all of those offensive players. And if you need something to quench your thirst and give you some energy like Tyreek Hill brings to the Dolphins, like Brian Thomas is going to do, I think, for the Jaguars, and Mike Evans does for the Buccaneers. Well, grab some Celsius, and you can do that in a couple ways. You can drive around town and you can find a convenience store, health and fitness store, a grocery store, and make life difficult for you. Although Celsius is pretty much everywhere now. Or you can go to Celsius.com, click on the store locator, and you can find those places just by punching in your address. It's a great way to try Celsius when you grab a can of each of the flavors and find out what flavors you like. You can even find some at maybe a local bodega. So the other way to do it is once you know which flavors you like, or maybe you can get the variety pack online at Amazon. You can have them shipped right to your house. The great thing about Celsius is it powers active lives every day with the essential energy you need, whether it's a morning kickstart or whether it's an afternoon pick-me-up or a great pre-workout drink. Make sure you're drinking Celsius, the official energy drink of Pewter Report.
I gotta say, I'm a big fan of Celsius as well. If we're straight on it,
what's your favorite flavor?
I've never been an energy drink person. I believe it was like kiwi, some sort of citrus kiwi mix up. I've really enjoyed. I was gonna say it's too bad that didn't exist back in college when I was an athlete.
Tell me about it. I was drinking Jolt Cola back
then.
They didn't have energy drinks. It was like Jolt Cola, which was like 3 or 4 times the amount of caffeine. So yeah, it probably wasn't safe. They don't even sell it anymore. It's not even like I think it's illegal probably at this stage of the game. So let's finish up with the offense. Then we'll get to the best side of the ball, which is defense, of course. But as we look at the offensive lines here for each of the teams, and this is really interesting because there's some transition going on in really 2 of these places. When you look at the Dolphins and with the Buccaneers. I think if we're being completely fair, you look at Tristan Wirfs, he is the best offensive lineman out of the 3 teams. I think we can say that reasonably speaking, right? You agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I thought we cut out for a second. Absolutely. Yeah, I think Tristan Wirfs is phenomenal from what we've seen from him. I think if we're going straight left tackles here, I do think Terran Armstead is a great player as well, but he just doesn't match up to Tristan Wirfs.
Yeah. And the Dolphins also drafted Patrick Pulse. What you're seeing here is we've listed the starters: left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle, etc., and then a couple of key reserves, right? And Patrick Paul was a second-round pick this year out of Houston, and he'll be that swing guy playing left and right tackle. Liam Eichenberg has some experience at center, but the Dolphins do have a new center in Aaron Brewer. And coming over from Tennessee, a very, very undersized center. I mean, and you look at him and Isaiah Wynn next to each other, those are very, very small offensive linemen. So it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, these guys can move. They're very athletic, very agile. So for that zone blocking scheme, I think that's going to really play to their strengths very well. But there's a lot of fluidity in Tampa, right? Because they have Graham Barton. This team wants him to unseat Robert Hainsey. We have Hainsey and Ben Bredesen as the kind of the super subs, the reserve players there.
Right.
And Sua Opeta, we've got him penciled in as the left guard. He was the starter yesterday at OTAs.
Yep.
But this Bucs offensive line, I think, can be slightly above average, or I think it can be really, really good, depending on how Barton excels, and if whether it's Opeta or Bredesen or Hainsey or Elijah Klein, the rookie. We'll see how the left guard shakes out, but I think there's so many variables that can happen between those 2 spectrums, like either above average or really good. We'll see what happens.
I think so too. I'm excited to see how they gel. It was cool to see, even though Barton, obviously they're easing him in. But it was cool to see him snap the ball a couple times to Mayfield yesterday. And like you said, Opeta as kind of a front runner at the position, even though Bredesen has more professional experience, more game experience.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see him taking over that guard position. And from what we've heard from Todd Bowles, he was really liking what he's seeing so far.
Yeah. And so I think when you look at the offensive lines, maybe I'm a little bit of a homer, but I think they've got the best bookend tackles, Tristan Wirfs and Luke Gedeke. And I think Wirfs will cut the sacks will get cut down a little bit from 5 to maybe 2 or 3 as he is going to feel more comfortable at left tackle this year. Luke Gedeke, I think he's got to really cut down the penalties, and I think he will. That was his biggest issue last year. And so when you look at the 2 tackles, it starts there. In the interior, I think Mauk's going to be a better player. I think Barton will be an upgrade over Hainsey. I'm inclined to give the Buccaneers the number 1 spot here. And I think from there, you're looking at probably maybe Jacksonville number 2. Mitch Morse is a hell of a center. Brandon Scherf still getting the job done at guard. Ezra Cleveland was acquired from the Vikings, and is a steady player there. What are your thoughts?
Mitch Morse was a really good pickup. There was actually a lot of talk. Very interesting. There was a lot of talk. I mean, I did mock draft after mock draft this offseason, a lot of roundups, and Graham Barton was on all 3. So I think, we saw the Jags who traded down on draft day, or on night 1 of the draft, but they originally had that 17th pick. There was some conversation. Are they going to go receiver? Are they going to go corner? There was also conversation about that offensive line. I saw JPJ on there. I saw Graham Barton on there a couple times, but of course they traded down and went with Brian Thomas Jr. And then for a while, Graham Barton, just because of his versatility, was in the conversation as well. For the Dolphins, they lost a lot this year. They lost Connor Williams. They lost Robert Williams, but they brought back Robert Jones on a 1-year deal. They did bring in Aaron Brewer, who has extremely mixed reviews. Like you said, he's a small guy. And I think Patrick Paul is going to step into that Terran Armstead role eventually.
Yeah.
I would give Jags the 2nd spot here just because I really like Mitch Morse at center. I like that Javon Foster pick. I think that's a great pick by them. So yeah, I would stick with Tampa Bay first here.
Yeah.
But I would go Jags second, and then I think the Dolphins are really going to have to figure it out because there's a lot of new faces in the rotation.
Agreed.
Doug Peterson wasn't necessarily thrilled with how the Jags offensive line performed. They didn't necessarily keep Trevor Lawrence upright like they were supposed to, but I do think some key offseason acquisitions there, and hopefully just more consistency, more experience playing with each other. I think we'll see the Jags perform a little bit better this year as well.
I do too, and it's going to be interesting to see what we'll kind of have our. I hate making predictions this early in the season, so we're not going to. I'm not going to give out how many wins each team's going to get. I'm just saying.
I'm not there yet.
I'm just saying, like at the end of the show, we're gonna say, head-to-head matchup. Like who wins? Who's the king of Florida here? Who runs the state? So, but first we need to get to the fun side of the ball. That's the defense.
Of course.
So, defensive lines. Now there's a lot of young talent in Tampa Bay, right? Yaya Diaby, Kalijah Kancey had great, promising rookie seasons. Vita Vea, I think, has lost some weight this offseason. We haven't seen it. We've heard about it. I know, right? You got Logan Hall. He's in a big year. He needs to step up and produce. And then Randy Gregory, we have him penciled in as the starter just due to experience there. But, these teams basically run 3-4 defenses. So we've got 3 defensive linemen and a pair of outside linebackers. And then we've got a couple of super subs, some guys that we figure will really kind of play a role in all of this, with Chris Braswell, the 2nd-round pick, and then Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, he's in a contract year. So, there's a lot of youth there. I don't know how it's going to shake out necessarily, but then you look at the Dolphins, and I'll set the table here and let you react. The Dolphins, when healthy, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, they're a bunch of studs when it comes to rushing the passer. And I think one of the players that really kind of shined last year, certainly in Miami, was Zach Seiler. I mean,
absolutely, to
come in with 10 sacks, he's a relative unknown, at least to me. I don't cover the Dolphins, but Neville Gallimore, Deshaun Hand. And then they go ahead and they sign Shaq Barrett, for an extra layer of pass rushing help.
That's interesting there.
Yeah, and then they draft Chop Robinson in the first round. So they don't want what happened last year to happen again. If Phillips and Chubb go down or one of those guys is out, they want to be fully stocked at outside linebacker. Then you're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Josh Allen, one of the premier pass rushers in the game, had an insane year last year in terms of getting to the quarterback. Just the sheer number of sacks he had, 17 and a half. And Trayvon Walker, another former first-round pick from Jacksonville, really showed up as well with 10 sacks. That is a one hell of a 1-2 punch there on the outside. Eric Armstead, I think, is a huge addition on the inside. And Roy Robertson Harris, a player that I'm not terribly familiar with, but as a team captain, 3.5 sacks. He's kind of like one of those glue guys, I think, on the inside for the Dolphins. Then you look at a couple of defensive linemen they drafted this year, Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson, so they can kind of load up in between the tackles there with some interior offensive, or I should say interior defensive linemen.
Yeah, and both LSU guys there as well. So that's pretty interesting. Jags were very LSU happy this year's draft. This is a really, really tough page for me to look at because I think there's a lot of unknown here. I mean, you want to see how some of these younger guys can kind of gel for the Bucs. I'm excited to see Vita Vea. We've talked a lot about him. I'm excited to see what Chris Braswell can do. I think that was an excellent pick by the Bucs. Defensive line for the Dolphins. Christian Wilkins is a huge loss. Right. They called Zach Sealer and Christian Wilkins. They quite literally referred to themselves as Salt and Pepper, which was excellent. You had to watch Hard Knocks to see it. But they're best friends and really built like this incredible culture on the offense or on the defensive line. Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, again, a really close-knit duo and performed at a really high level. And then you see the MetLife curse take Phillips down. You see Chubbs go down both with surgery requiring injuries. That was a huge loss for the Dolphins. That honestly, that was the beginning of the end of their season for them. So those two guys are fundamental, which I guess is why they went with the Chop Robinson selection, because they did lose Van Ginkel. They did lose some of these other key pieces to the defense that can step in if needed. A lot of people were shocked by the Chop Robinson pick. I mean, myself included. I was stunned, but I don't hate it. And I think that he's got, a really high ceiling for them. So they definitely do have some really strong edge rushers there. But I think Christian Wilkins, they just don't have an answer yet for how they're going to kind of fill that gap. And hopefully Sealer can continue to kind of pick up where he left off. But it'll be interesting to see how they fill that void. And then
what are your thoughts on Jacksonville? Yeah,
the Jags. I think that they have the potential this upcoming year to be the best team on this list, defensive line wise. I think that we're going to see some good things from them. Trayvon Walker, I feel like, is kind of coming into his own. They're starting to see what they wanted from him. And then Josh Allen's a stud. He got his payday. Yeah. Eric Armstead, proven ability. And then they have the LSU pair that, has had some success, specifically Mason Smith. So, we'll have to see. I do think the Jags potentially I would place at number 1 here. I think the Dolphins have potential to surpass them, but really there's so many question marks surrounding how they're going to replace Christian Wilkins, what they're going to look like. And then the Bucs front is just so young.
It is.
But very excited to see what they do there as well. So
I'm going to go Jacksonville 1. I'm going to go Tampa Bay 2. And I think Miami 3 because of the loss of Christian Wilkins. And I think Zach Seiler benefited from Wilkins a little bit. Those guys kind of played off each other, right? So now how is he going to perform without having Wilkins, to play off of? And Phillips and Chubb, we'll see if they can stay healthy, right? I mean, that's kind of the big thing. And Shaq Barrett, I have no idea how much he has left in the tank. Is he a 2.5 sack guy this year in a rotation, or does he end up as a rotational guy chipping in 6 or 7 sacks because he's coming off the bench fresh? And Chop Robinson, I don't know. I was not terribly high on him before the draft. I think he's more of he's more of an athlete than he is an instinctive football player. Reminds me a little bit of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka in that respect.
Right.
Didn't really see the sack production. If you're that good of an athlete, you should have produced more sacks in college than he did. and get to the quarterback. Plus, he also missed some sack opportunities. He'd get back there, but wouldn't seal the deal. And I think that's kind of been the problem with JTS. He's not that much of a finisher. So I would go Jacksonville 1, Tampa Bay 2, Dolphins 3 here. Miami.
I think I'm going to agree with Jacksonville at number 1. I'm going to take Dolphins number 2 here just because of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb. I really love those two together.
Yeah.
I'm hoping Zach Sealer can kind of, step into an even bigger role this year. But like you said, we'll see. The loss of Christian Wilkins is really gonna tell us what their season's gonna look like. And then the Bucs, I think, definitely have the potential to surpass the Dolphins there. But for right now, just because I need to see some more from them, I'm gonna put them at number 3.
Yeah, well, that's a cool looking picture of Yaya Diaby there. And if you've had a chance to stand next to Yaya Diaby, he's got two things you're going to notice. He's got a huge Hulk-like physique, and he's got an awesome smile, too. He's one of the friendliest guys you'll ever meet off the football field. On the football field, ask opposing quarterbacks, it's a different story. But the cool thing is he was on the Bucs Cruise last year, the Tampa Bay Bucs Cruise, had a great time, and probably will be back this year. I'm not going to say he will, but they had over 15 Bucs players on the cruise last year, and it was a blast. So my recommendation to you Bucs fans out there is to sign up today for the Tampa Bay Bucs Cruise.
It's a good.
I couldn't do it without tapping right here.
There ain't nothing like this right here. Got me seeing things crystal clear. So high, I can top them all. It's gonna feel. There's a fire underneath my feet. Got me rolling like a river deep. Let it flow, cause I know when my soul's in the field.
That's right. Join the Tampa Bay Bucs Cruise in 2025. Join hundreds of Bucs fans on the third annual Tampa Bay Bucs Cruise. It sets sail March 7th through 10th in 2025. I'll be there. The Pewter Report staff will be there on the beautiful celebrity ship called Silhouette. The 3-night cruise begins in Fort Lauderdale, visits Key West, Bimini, Bahamas. Last year's cruise had Yaya Diaby, Rashad White, Luke Gedeke, K-Dot, and Jamel Dean, Super Bowl 37 MVP Dexter Jackson, Hall of Famer Warren Sapp, Gene Deckerhoff, and others. Even more players are expected next year, and they've already solidified a commitment from Hall of Famer Mr. Derek Brooks. There will be photo and autograph opportunities with the players, a raise the flag sail-away party, VIP parties with the players, special player interviews, a water volleyball challenge, Bucs trivia contests, fun and games, and more. Reserve your cabin now on the 2025 Tampa Bay Bucs Cruise, where drinks, including alcohol, Wi-Fi, and tips are all included. All you need to do is put down a $200 deposit per person that's refundable until August 16th. So visit TampaBayBucsCruise.com. That's TampaBayBucsCruise.com, or give them a call at 1-800-975-7112. Have you ever been on a cruise, Maura?
I have. Disney Cruise when I was little.
Yeah.
I don't think it was anything like the Bucs Cruise, but I've heard phenomenal things.
Yeah.
I've both from players and fans. I think the players really had a great time kind of getting to know some of the fans. And I wouldn't want to go head to head with the Pewter Report team at a Bucs trivia contest. I'll just say that.
Well, the only reason we would do well, I think, is because I'm old. And but at the same time, my fading memory with my old age would work against me. So like it would be on the tip of my tongue, the answer, and I probably wouldn't lose it, especially if I had a couple drinks in me. So that's
I
cool
would
thing.
I would rather compete with you guys than against you guys. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, yeah, you're welcome to join the team for sure. Speaking of teams, if you're just joining us, we are ranking the Bucs, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars. And we're doing that with GolfLive.com's Maura Carey. She not just covers the Buccaneers, folks. She covers the Dolphins and the Jaguars, too. And if you have the opportunity, make sure you visit GolfLive.com and check out Maura's work. You can also follow her on X at Takes by Maura. So make sure that you are doing that and she is a St. Petersburg resident. So your home base is really the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization. You're a fixture now at the team facility, and then you'll, I'm sure, be doing some traveling to Jacksonville and Miami during times, and certainly during the preseason, because the Bucs, as we mentioned before, in the second preseason game, will be having that game at Jacksonville with a pair of practices, joint practices against the Jaguars, then coming back down to Tampa to welcome the Miami Dolphins for 2 practices, and then that third and final preseason game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be present at the Bucs facility. It's definitely home games as much as possible during OTAs, training camp. And then hopefully some of those primetime games I can get out to the other places. But I do cover all 3 teams every single day, so it's been a lot of fun.
Very cool. Let's get back to talking about the defensive players, and let's go kind of quickly through the linebackers, because these teams run 3-4 defenses, and a lot of those guys were outside linebackers that we put up there with the defensive line. That's where they line up. So really just 2 starting linebackers, and then we've got 3 reserves, 3 of the top reserves. And starting with Tampa Bay, it's Levante David and KJ Britt. Then you see the reserves there: Servassier Dennis, JJ Russell, Kalen DeLoach, if he makes the team, would be that 5th inside linebacker. Dolphins have a very high-priced Jordan Brooks, who I think kind of underperformed last year, statistically speaking. Pro Football Focus was not a big fan of his game. David Long Jr. is the other starting inside linebacker. And then Fosade, did I say that correctly?
I think he just goes by Foye.
Foye Olakun, who is, I think, a really good player. Had some really good seasons at Atlanta. I think he's been a really good addition for the Jaguars. And then Devin Lloyd. And then you've got their backups, Chad Muma, Ventrell Miller, and Caleb Johnson, along with the Dolphins' backups, Anthony Walker, Duke Riley, and Channing Tindall, who was, remember, that Georgia Bulldogs national championship defense there. So when you look at the starters, just the 1-2 punch there. Obviously, no Devin White anymore in Tampa Bay. KJ Britt kind of stole that job from him at the end of the season. Big year for him. He's in a contract year. Big year for Levante David, who's 34 in a contract year.
Yep,
how did David and Britt stack up with the Dolphins and the Jaguars linebackers, Maura?
I would give the Bucs the number 1 spot here. I think Levante David still has some gas left in the tank for sure. He's going to retire a Buck. I'm a big fan of him. I would put the Jags at 2nd year, and I would put the Dolphins at 3rd, just because I do think those guys underperformed a little bit. Foye is a great player, like we said. Devin Lloyd, I think, had a better 2022 year. 2023, he fared all right. 2024, hopefully he'll step back up again. I would go Bucs 1st, Jags 2nd, Dolphins 3rd here.
I tend to agree. I think that's kind of how it shakes out in my mind as well. And I think Lloyd has a chance of kind of rising up a little bit, having a better year. And I like Olakun. I think he's one of my favorite linebackers in the NFL. I just think he can do a lot from a coverage standpoint, blitz, tackle, and all of that. So, but when you got Levante David, he's the best linebacker on that list on any team. And still have to give the old man his props. He is alive and kicking.
And I also think the depth. I think Tampa Bay has a little bit more depth here as well. So
yeah, and it's a little unproven, but at the same time, I think Larry Foote's a hell of a coach. When you look at JJ Russell coming in and against the Panthers last year and just having a sack and 7 tackles, and I mean, he looked like a starting caliber player, and he's probably 4th on that list in terms of the depth chart. So yeah, I agree with you. The talent's there. It's just we haven't seen enough of JJ Russell, seen enough of Servassier Dennis. It doesn't mean they can't do it. Just means they haven't had the opportunity. Secondary, it's a little bit of an interesting situation, right? Because just to kind of set the table here, you got the starting corners, Jamel Dean and Zion McCollum in Tampa Bay. And then, I mean, it's the best starting tandem of safeties in the league with Antoine Winfield Jr. and Jordan Whitehead. It just is. I mean, when you're looking at the safeties, these are 2 proven guys that are the best 1-2 punch in the league, I believe. But the cornerbacks for Tampa Bay, they're a little suspect. Zion McCollum is going to be thrust into that starting role this year, and he's earned it, but no career interceptions. Dean didn't have an interception last year and dropped a couple. And then you got Bryce Hall, the newcomer. We didn't have room to list Javier Thomas. He's also a newcomer for Tampa Bay. Christian Izien, is he going to be the nickel back, or is he going to be Tyke Smith? Then it's kind of the opposite in Miami. Not that their safeties are bad. Jordan Poyer, is not bad, but their cornerbacks are good. Jalen Ramsey, right? Kendall Fuller. So it's kind of the exact opposite of what the Buccaneers have. And you see their backups and their nickels as well. And then with Jacksonville, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think these guys have had some moments, but throughout an entire season, Ronald Darby, Andre Sisco, Antonio Johnson. I think I misspelled Antonio. Sorry about that, Antonio. Tyson Campbell, Darnell Savage, Terrell Edmonds, Andrew Wingard. I'm not terribly impressed with Jacksonville's secondary.
No, and this is as the draft was going, and I mean, Jacksonville had the most picks out of these three teams, and he didn't really answer that cornerback question. And that's a player that I thought like Cooper DeJean was just waiting for him to trade up in that second round. And they had the capital that they could have traded up, and they just didn't do it. Why they didn't do it and why he wound up on the Eagles with Quinion Mitchell and neither of those guys wound up on the Jags is beyond me. I'm still angry about it, clearly. But no, I don't think the Jags really answered the questions that they needed to here. So I would put them slightly out of the conversation for now. And I think, like you mentioned, you look at the Bucs and you look at the Dolphins and you kind of have, you some really phenomenal safeties. Yeah. Highest paid DB in the league on the Bucs. And then for the Dolphins, you have some really strong corners. So it's a very, very difficult call.
Yeah, it's kind of like eyes and the beauty of the beholder. I'm going to give the edge to Tampa Bay here. I think Dean kind of rebounds. I think he saw what happened to Carlton Davis getting traded. Why? Because he was oft injured and dropped interceptions. And what is Jamel Dean? Well, he's become a guy that is oft injured and drops interceptions. So if he wants to stay in Tampa Bay and enjoy that paycheck, he's got to really step up his play. I think he does. I think Zion McCollum is a star in the making. If not, Bryce Hall, I think, is right there as a safety net. I think Tyke Smith will be the nickel this year. And again, that safety 1-2 punch gives me the edge for Tampa Bay. And I think the Dolphins second and the Jaguars third.
I think that similar to quarterback situation, I'm going to have to do kind of a 1A, 1B here. I really do like the DBs on the Dolphins. I like Javon Holland a ton. Mm-hmm. Jordan Poyer, I think, is good. I really like Kohu a lot. Jalen Ramsey, I think, if you're kind of taking the best player on both of these secondaries, Jalen Ramsey, Antoine Winfield Jr., I'm just going to go Antoine Winfield Jr. Yeah. So I give the Bucs the edge there for sure. Dolphins second, big gap, and then Jags for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, which team is the best in Florida. But before we get to that, I'm going to remind you that Jason Light is our guest tomorrow. That's the Bucs general manager. So make sure you're here at 4 o'clock as we end our week of programming with the guy at the top of the depth chart in Tampa Bay, the guy that runs the show. Bucs general manager Jason Light at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Don't miss that show. And Maura, this has been an interesting exercise, and I've had my mind changed a little bit about some of these position groups. Hearing you talk, you're very well versed on not just the Bucs but Dolphins and Jaguars too. I'm going to give the floor to you to rank these teams from 1, 2, and 3. In other words, if there's a head-to-head between the Bucs and Dolphins and Bucs and Jags and Dolphins, which team comes out on top? Who's the best team in Florida entering the 2024 season?
So this is just such a tough one. And one, I have to thank you for letting me go before Jason Light and not after, because that would be a tough act to follow. So very exciting that you guys have him. I'll absolutely be tuning in tomorrow. But back to the question. So I would have started this episode, I think, saying the Dolphins. Mm-hmm. And I think I would have done that just because, they're such a high-powered, intimidating, speedy offense. The Jags, I think, have some unanswered questions still. I think this next year, I don't think we're going to see them regress. I think they could have a very similar year, especially with the Houston Texans in the AFC South. And the AFC in general is stacked. Yeah. And I think, if I could even see the Indianapolis Colts with some of the moves they made, really, really kind of taking over that division as well. So I don't know if the Jags are good enough to secure a wild card seat at this point. Right. And they're with CJ Stroud and everything going on in the division. Yeah. I don't think they're winning the division either. So I'm going to put them at third. Whew. Okay. I still think the Bucs somehow, after the year they had last year, are extremely underrated. I think a lot of people are giving Atlanta their props. Yeah. And I think it's a little premature. I love this Bucs roster. And I think because of what they were able to maintain going into next season, because they were able to keep all of the key pieces and then add talent.
Yeah.
I'm going to put Bucs at number 1, whereas the Dolphins could not figure out how to keep all of their key pieces.
Yeah.
They were way over the cap. So, I mean, their hands were tied, but I think that we're going to see the Bucs have the better season here. And hopefully I don't regret those words.
I do too. I just think there's something about the way that this team finished. It surprised me. I was just about ready to say Todd Bowles is going to get fired. They were 4-7, but at the end of the day, this team found a way to win. I think Jason Light has done a tremendous job drafting players of high character. These are guys that don't run from the fight; they run to the fight. I like we finished the season 5-1. They went to Detroit as underdogs, and you know what? They gave them a pretty good fight until the fourth quarter, and then the home team I just think that the Buccaneers season this year can be what the Lions season was last year, because if you remember, Detroit was 9-8 the year before. In 2022, they didn't make the playoffs. They were hungry. They felt a little snubbed, etc. And then they made that big jump. I think this is the year the Bucs make the big jump. I think Liam Cohen is going to be a better offensive coordinator than Dave Canales in year 1 in Tampa. And I think Todd Bowles' defense has got a lot of youth, speed, athleticism, and now some experience with guys like Yaya Diaby and Zion McCollum and Kalijah Kancey figuring things out after playing a lot last year.
I also think with Miami, you have some of these leaders leave. And I mean, you look at that receiver room, leaders on the field. I don't know about off, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of personality. I love Jalen Waddle, but there's a lot of personality, a lot of ego in that receiver room.
Yeah.
I think Tua was a phenomenal guy, but I think you look at the Bucs leadership. Baker Mayfield's a guy that team wants to play for. I mean, we heard Whitehead say yesterday. I mean, he's ready to run through a wall for the guy. So I think offensively, defensively, they have leaders. And I also think a lot of this comes back to the front office. Like we said, Jason Light has just done a phenomenal job this offseason retaining key talent, but also bringing in some really talented players and drafting very well so far. So, I'm excited for the Bucs year. That's not to say that the Dolphins aren't going to compete. And I mean, the Jags could very well be in the mix. I mean, it was really came down to week 18 last year for all 3 of these teams.
It did.
I like what you're saying about kind of the Bucs being last year's Lions.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad at all. And if they can keep that kind of underdog Philadelphia Eagles like mentality, I like where they could go this year.
I agree, Maura, and I think too that Tampa Bay is the best team, cohesive, together, all following the lead of Todd Bowles and Baker Mayfield, all kind of drafted in the light in the mold of Jason Light. This is a real high character team, and that's what gets you through the tough times. That's what allows you to go from 4-7 to 9-8, and then drub the hell out of the Eagles in week 1, and then give the Lions a fight into the fourth quarter on the road in a very tough environment there. So I think from a team perspective, it doesn't mean that the Bucs are going to have a better record than the Dolphins. I think it'd very well be a situation where Miami wins another game or two, just like it was last year.
If we're talking head-to-head matchups, like I feel confident with the Bucs against the Jags. I think a lot rides on that defense. If the Bucs go head-to-head with the Dolphins, so I could very well see head-to-head the Dolphins winning that matchup. Yeah. But I agree. We're talking leadership. We're talking all-around talent. And kind of that consistency going into another year, familiarity with each other. I like the Bucs as universally the best team in Florida.
I do too. I do think the Bucs run the state more. I'm with you. And it's a shame that we get the Bucs Dolphins in the preseason, not the regular season, because Mike McDaniel's offense versus Todd Bowles' defense, and those two guys with the chess matches that they could play. That would be something. Who knows? Maybe we'll see it in the Super Bowl this year. That would be something, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't be mad about that at all. That's for sure.
Exactly. Well, we really appreciate you coming by again. Takes by Maura on X. Make sure you follow her. Read her work at golflive.com. And just also make sure that you're checking out pewterreport.com too, because that's our website. And we've got some great content all week and weekend long. From still some stories coming out from Bucs OTA yesterday. We're over 14,000 subscribers on our YouTube page. That's Pewter Report TV. Make sure that you have subscribed and hit the like button. Leave us a comment that helps with the algorithms in YouTube, gets us in front of more awesome Pewter people like you. Just dropped a new Pewter Pulse video on Tristan Wirfs yesterday. It's getting some good reviews. Thank you so much for that. Make sure you follow us on X, Instagram, and Facebook, or social media at Pewter Report. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, make sure that you end your week with us tomorrow at 4 o'clock as we have Bucs General Manager Jason Light.
I know
as
I
our
will
guest.
be.
There you
I'll
go.
be
Yeah,
in for sure.
exactly. So we do this little thing at the end of the show where we both say out and we both put up 2 fingers, kind of like what Antoine Winfield Jr. did to Tyreek Hill, which kind of brings it full circle with this conversation, right, in the Super Bowl. So we'll end the show with that. We appreciate Maura for joining us. Make sure you follow her.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for today's show. So make sure you join us tomorrow at 4 o'clock for Jason Light here on the Pewter Report podcast. And